Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Almighty God, grant me and all my loved ones a chance truly to rest on this Shabbat. May the light of the candles drive out from among us the spirit of anger, the spirit of harm. Send your blessings to my children that they may walk in the ways of your Torah, your light. We will continue on page 738. Would somebody like to read the last paragraph, starting time has independent?
Time has independent, ultimate. Oh, my connection's pretty unstable. It might not work.
You're
Ultimate
fine.
significance. It is of more majesty and more evocative of awe than even a sky studded with stars. Gliding gently in the most ancient of all splendors, it tells so much more than space can say in its broken language of things, playing symphonies upon the instruments of isolated beings, unlocking the earth and making it happen. Time is the process of creation, and things of space are results of creation. When looking at space, we see the products of creation. When intuiting time, we hear the process of creation. Things of space exhibit a deceptive independence. They show off a veneer of limited permanence. Things created conceal the creator. It is the dimension of time wherein we meet God, wherein
we become aware that every instant is an act of creation, a beginning, opening up new roads for ultimate realizations. Time is the presence of God in the world of space, and it is within time that we are able to sense the unity of all beings. I selected that for several reasons. One is it's absolutely gorgeous, and I still don't really understand what it means. The other, among other things, it's from Heschel's book called The Sabbath, which I read in college for a course that I took that I chose because I was struggling with my relationship with Judaism. And this book is really the only thing I remember from the course, and it really made a deep, deep impression of me. And so when I opened the Reconstructionist Prayer Book for the first time and realized that this piece was in there, it really felt like a strong piece of connection to me. The other reason that I was struck by it, and by the Kavanah that I read earlier, is that there's something about pandemic time that seems fundamentally different. For one thing, there's a clear before and after, which, while I think we all have those, often for moments of loss, we have the before and the after. It's, in my experience, almost, I mean, for us as a collectively, as a society, as a community, to have a before and after this clearly, it's things like assassinations, like 9/11. It doesn't happen very often. And because it isn't a single event, it is, or at least it isn't a point in time, it's gone on for so long, there are ways in which, for me anyway, time has both telescoped and contracted, right? So I think about something and I think, oh, that was last year. And then I realized it was before the pandemic. So it had to be at least 2 and probably 3 years ago. And And I'm sure that part of the reason I'm thinking about all these things is that my daughter just graduated from college, and it's one of those moments where you kind of think, oh my God, how did that happen? And it's also, I think, where we are collectively. So all of the readings about time really struck me when I was looking at things for this service. So we will continue on page 13 with Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malakei Hasharet, Malakei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malakei HaMalakim HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Bachem l'shalom, Malakei Hashalom, Malakei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malakei HaMalakim HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu ni l'shalom, Malakei Hashalom, Malakei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malakei HaMalakim HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. Seichem l'shalom, Malakei Hashalom, Malakei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malakei HaMalakim HaKadosh, Baruch Hu. We continue on page 20. And we're going to read the psalm in English on 20 and 22, and then return and sing Lahu Naranana on 21. Come, sing in ecstasy to the Eternal One. Ring out a fanfare to our rock of rescue. Hurry forth in thanks before the presence, shouting in song to God. For the Creator is a generous divinity, a sovereign greater than all image gods, in whose hand the planetary depths reside, the greatest heights there in God's palm. To whom belongs the sea as it was made, the dry land shaped by divine hand. Come worship, bend the knee, let's bow to the eminence who made us all. This is our God, and we, nurtured by God, a flock under God's care. Today, if to the voice you'll listen, harden not your heart as it was done at Meribah, as on a day of trial in the wilderness. There your predecessors tested me, they put to trial my patience, but they saw my power. For 40 years, I argued with that generation until finally I said, they are a people with a wandering heart, nor did they ever come to know my ways. And as for them, I swore amid my wrath that they'll not come into my place of rest. One of the reasons I wanted to read this in English is that we just read last week in the Parsha about what happened at Meribah, and that was the place that Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock as he had been told to do. And that is one of the reasons, and probably the most commonly cited reason, why Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. Page 21, Lechu Neranana. Lechu Neranana Ladonai, Naria Litzur Yishenu, Nikad Mafanav Betodah, Bizmirod Naria Lo, Nikad Mafanav Betodah, Bizmirod Naria Lo. Kiel Gadol Adonai, Umelech Gadol al kol Elohim, Asher be'ado mekarei haaretz, v'to'afot harim lo, Asher be'ado mekarei haaretz, v'to'afot harim lo. Turn to page 765. And would somebody read the Piece of Wild Things?
I'll read that.
Thank you.
When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
I think a lot of us are currently living in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be. And I find hope in that poem. Page 31, or Zorua. Light beams are seeded for the righteous. Or Zarua la Tzadik, Uyishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua la Tzadik, Uyishrei lev simcha. Simchut tzadikim b'Adonai, v'hodu lezecher kodsho. Simchut tzadikim b'Adonai, v'hodu lezecher kodsho. We continue as we come to the end of the Kabbalat Shabbat, or the welcoming Shabbat portion of our service. We come to Lecha Dodi on page 41. We're going to sing the first verse on 41, the second verse on 43, then we are going to skip to 47 and do the last two verses, and we will rise if we're comfortable for the last verse. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Yishmianu el hamyuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad, L'shem al tiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat shala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Ki hi mekor haberacha. Merosh mikedem nesucha, Sof maaseh b'machshvat hila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Yomin u'smol tifrotzi, V'et Adonai taritzi. Al yad ish bein partzi, V'nesmicha v'nagila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, Gam besimcha u'bsola. Tokemune am segula. Boi chala, boi chala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. So we now are moving into the Mariv, or evening portion of the service. And the next part of the service is the Baruch Hu, which we generally do not do unless we have a minion. What?
Ooh, we do. Izzy
Excellent.
snuck in. There's a couple extras poking around. We're at 10.
Excellent. Great, glad to hear it. So we are going to start with singing the Faith Rogau Kavanah on the bottom of 246, and then we will move to the Baruch Hu on 56 and 57. And since we stand as we are able for the Baruch Hu, I'm going to stand now. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. And the blessing gives us strength and makes our vision clear. And the blessing gives us peace and the courage to dare. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed. Be seated. So the next is the prayer for the evening, and I always like to read a poem by Jane Kenyon. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. We turn now to Ahavat Olam on 63. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta Torah u'mitzvot u'kimu mishpatim otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu v'shokveinu u'vekumeinu nasiach bechukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Ki hem chayenu v'orech yameinu v'orech yameinu uvahem nogeh yomam v'layla yomam v'layla v'havatecha lo tazor mimenu la'olamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Continue with Shema. On the next page, we will chant the Shema and the Bahavta together, and then we'll continue with silently, whichever biblical selection you choose, and we'll meet up again on page 73. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha Uvlektecha havaderek, Uvshokbecha uvekumecha, ukshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot beinenecha, uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvisharecha. Adonai Elohim Emet. Page 76. We acknowledge as true and trustworthy that there is but one universal God, and that to God's service Israel stands eternally committed. We recognize in God the power that has enabled us to triumph over defeat, persecution, and oppression. It was God who redeemed us from Egyptian bondage and delivered us from the despotism of the pharaohs. For God wills that we be free to use our powers in holy service and be not bound to the arbitrary rule of any mortal. Whenever human rulers usurp divine authority and exploit the people, those tyrants' hearts are hardened, their own arrogance writes their doom. Therefore, we will never be discouraged nor dismayed when unrighteous powers rise up to destroy us. Though enemy hosts pursue us, we shall remember how our ancestors were saved at the Sea of Reeds. We therefore repeat the words of triumph with which they give thanks for their deliverance. On page 79. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele, malchutecha ra'u banecha, bokeyam lifnei Moshe, ze'eli anu ve'amru, Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. V'ne'emar ki fada Adonai et Yaakov, ugalo miyad chazak mimenu, Baruch atah Adonai, Ogal Yisrael. Before we chant the Hashkivenu, would somebody read the Kavanah in the middle of 82 that starts, enable us, God?
I can do that one.
Thanks.
Enable us, God, to behold meaning in the chaos of life about us and purpose in the chaos of life within us. Deliver us from the sense of futility in our strivings toward the light and the truth. Give us strength to ride safely through the maelstrom of petty cares and anxieties. May we behold things in their proper proportions and see life in its wholeness and its holiness.
Hashkivenu, Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu, L'shalom v'hamidenu, Malkeinu lechaim. Hashkivenu, Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu, L'shalom v'hamidenu, Malkeinu lechaim. The unknown night, like the unknown tomorrow, can only be met with faith in the power of infinite compassion to care for us. On page 85, we continue with Veshamru. Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uvein Bnei Israel, Oti leolam, Oti leolam, Veshamru Bnei Israel et Shabbat, Lasot et Shabbat ledorotam beritolam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat lasot et Shabbat ledorotam beritolam. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat la'asot et Shabbat bevedorotam beritolam. We come now to the Amidah, which is the central prayer of our service. And one of the interesting things about the structure of our liturgy to me is that the central prayer, the Amidah or standing prayer, which we do on Friday nights, we do silently, and then we and sometimes we repeat it, but it's an individual prayer. And yet, the structure of the liturgy basically demands that we be in community before we can say the prayer. We have the Baruch Hu, we have to have a minyan, if we follow all of that. And there's something about that, the standing in community to pray individually, that I think is really very powerful and very specific to Judaism. Actually, 730, please, Liz, page 730. Thanks. So we're going to do this as a prelude to the Amidah, and then we will go back to the Amidah, which starts on page 90, and pray either the words in the prayer book silently to 107, or the words in your heart, or one of the additional readings in the book. And then we will come back together and sing Oseh Shalom on page 107. They say we're supposed to be in a palace. So we bow and take certain steps as the prescribed supplication drops from our lips. But what do we really know of castles and kings? My kitchen faucet constantly leaks, and the kids' faces usually need cleaning. If a door opened to a real palace, I'd probably forget carrying a load of groceries. No, the door we stand in front of when the Amidah begins is silence. And when we open it and step through, we arrive in our hearts. Mine's not a fancy place. No jewels, no throne, certainly not fit for a king. But in that small chamber, for just a few moments on Sabbath, God and I can roll up our sleeves, put some schnapps out on the table, sit down together, and finally talk. That's palace enough for me. Rise as you are able or wish to for the Amidah, starting on page 90. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru, imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael. V'al kol yoshvei tevel. Ve'imru, amen. So how about we do the Misha Berach, Liz? I'm sorry, I know I wasn't clear about where I wanted that.
I had stuck it in right after this, so it's good anyway.
Perfect.
It's good. Here's our list.
So we are praying for refuah shlema for Risa Dorfman, Lucas Lodex, Doug Smith, Fern Geld, Ann Keller-Smith, John Goldsworthy, Suzanne Flair, Jay Miller, Don Castile, Jody and Ellie Rosenblum, Susan Panic, Hanan Al-Salani, Betsy Keshis, Mayan Medair, David A. Esther Simcha Bat Harav, David A. Esther Simcha Bat Harav, Mashav Harav Shlomo, Joseph Huntz, Justin Huntz, Reverend Emma Jane Finney, Shelley Smulowitz, Reverend Lloyd Steffen, Roz Marks, Betsy Nippon, and Miguel Garcia. Wilma, would you like to sing Misha Berach tonight?
Okay. Misha Berach Avotenu Bechor Abraham Mimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Bechor Abraham Yavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Thanks, Wilma. So for our discussion this evening, our Torah portion this week is the portion of Balak. Balak is one of the Canaanite kings through whose territory the Israelites are traveling, and they ask for permission to pass through, and he doesn't really want them to, and they're camped out on the edges of the territory. And Balak goes to one of his, depending on your translation, seer, fortune teller, magician, mystical person, Balaam, and he asks Balaam to go curse the Israelites. And there's some interesting pieces in there where it certainly seems like Balaam says, well, I can only do what God tells me to do. And despite the fact that the Torah is clear that these are pagans, Balaam is talking about God, our God. using the term Elohim. So that's interesting. And there's some backing and forthing, and ultimately Balaam gets on his donkey and he starts to travel toward the Israelites. And so God comes to Balaam and says, go where Balak has told you to go. And go with the men, go with Balak's men. So the next day, Balaam gets up and he gets on his donkey and he heads out with Balak's men. And then God gets very angry. Now, there's a question, as far as I'm concerned, and not just me, about why God is angry if Balaam is doing what God told him to do. But at any rate, the Torah says God gets angry and God sends a messenger to stand in the road and block Balaam's way. But Balaam can't see the messenger. The donkey can see the messenger. So the donkey stops. And the donkey stops 3 times. And each time Balaam basically beats the donkey until the donkey starts moving again. And they start out on a road, and then they are on a 1-lane road, basically. And then they are on a very narrow path. And that time the donkey, is so tight for space and so unwilling, go forward, that first she crushes Balaam's leg against the stone wall, and then she just basically kneels down and she's not going any further. And Balaam starts yelling at her in addition to hitting her and saying, what are you doing? Why aren't you going anywhere? And in my memory of this story, the donkey talks, right? I know the donkey talks. That's one of the striking things about the story, is that the donkey talks. But in my memory of the story, the donkey says, look, God doesn't want us to go. That's not actually what the donkey says. What the donkey says is, why are you beating me? Have I ever done anything? I've served you faithfully for so many years. Have I ever done anything to justify being beaten like this? And Balaam says, no, you haven't. And then Balaam can see the messenger of God. So the donkey actually never points out. All the donkey says to Balaam is, why are you hitting me? And do I deserve that? And I hadn't noticed it, hadn't thought about it until I read a commentary in a book of women's commentaries on the Torah, where the writer points this out, quotes the passage, and says, the donkey is speaking up about abuse. The donkey is naming that, and it's very clearly a female donkey. I don't speak Hebrew, but this is not the only commentary I read that makes it clear that it's a female donkey in the Torah, and she is speaking up to say, I am being abused and that is not right. And what enables Balaam to see the messenger of God is that he acknowledges that he was wrong and that the abuse is not deserved. Now, we never hear from the donkey again. The donkey disappears from the Torah, disappears from the story. Other things go on and happen. This is the parsha in which Matovu, what that Matovu comes from, because when Balaam and Balak finally get to where the Israelites are encamped, and they're, Balak tries 3 times to get Balaam to curse the Israelites, and each time he blesses them, and the last time what he says is Matovu. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. And then there's a whole other thing about people being impaled, and we're not going to go there tonight. But so the donkey disappears, but it was interesting. I mean, it was really striking to me that, first of all, I've been doing Torah study. I've been doing Havruta Torah study with a friend for, I don't know, at least 5 years. I've read this parsha every year. I always thought, I mean, it's one of those things, you read it every year and you notice something different. I had never noticed that was specifically what the donkey said. And I never thought about it in terms of abuse or in terms of naming abuse. And that, to me, is such a powerful image. And particularly now, when I am quite sure I am not the only person struggling with how to speak up about what I see happening around me, it is a message I think we need to hear and really think about. And I think that while the language is different, Balaam's experience is in the same tradition, I guess, as Hagar and Miriam, both of whom had their eyes opened to see wells of water, right? When Hagar goes off because she doesn't want to see Ishmael die, it doesn't say in the Torah that God makes the well appear. It says God allows her to see it. So this repeated theme of God opening our eyes and allowing us to see things, and led me to think about what it is that we do internally or externally, or that what is it within our control that allows us to see what God is trying to show us. And piece that stayed with me, the speaking up about abuse, and that acknowledging he was wrong was what allowed Balaam to actually see the angel of God. So that's what I offer for discussion. Take it anywhere you want. Hi, Anne. You have to unmute, honey.
I hit the ask to unmute. Should. There you go.
There you go.
There we go. I'm struggling with a lot of things, but the biggest thing is I can kind of see intellectually what I'd like to see happen within myself, but I'm not really able to get there. I need the donkey to speak to me, I think.
Yeah.
Sort of stuck. Balaam was kind of stuck because the donkey wasn't moving, because the donkey could see the angel.
Yeah.
So part of me is the donkey and part of me is Balaam. And I'm sort of stuck.
Right.
Yeah.
And
How
it's
do I open that?
right.
And it's adjusting compassion, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think we can make the donkey talk, right? Maybe I may have stretched this metaphor as far as I can.
Well, he was beating the donkey. You
I'm
have to
sorry.
shut the door before the door says, "Stop beating on me."
Mm-hmm. Not stop, just why? And do I deserve this? Yeah.
I think there are two things here. I think one thing is sometimes that we get very fixated on something we think we want to do. And it might not be the right thing to do. And I get like that. I just bullheaded, just keep going. And you just can't see the no, this is not right. I'm not going in a right path. I'm not making a right choice. And, until we can open our eyes to what's around us, we're kind of stuck. And here he had, and I guess sometimes other people can see it, and we just have to listen. We have to listen to what other people have to tell us, whether we like it or not, and at least listen, and he didn't want to listen to the poor donkey. And then the donkey gets beaten for no reason. So we're dealing with two things, one being stubborn. And the second thing in being abusive to the poor animal for no reason.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the being in this story who's being stubborn is not actually the donkey, right?
No,
We usually think of as stubborn. And it's interesting, Wilma, listening to you say that, what comes to my mind is listening to marginalized voices. That those of us who sit in majority positions, you know, as white people in a racist society, as straight people in a homophobic society, need to listen to. Those are the voices that I need to listen to, as I want not, you know, Christians to listen to my voice as a marginalized person in a clearly Christian society. And that's because that hadn't struck me before, but I think you're right. I think,
but I think we all have to listen. I think we all
Absolutely.
have to open our ears and listen to other opinions, even though we might not like them. We at
Absolutely.
least have to listen to them.
and we have to, I mean, it actually is it's a dang good metaphor actually for the conversations around marginalization, because part of what happens is that Balaam understands and accepts the donkey's experience, right? He is not, Balaam doesn't say, I'm not hitting you, Eddie. You know, he doesn't gaslight the donkey. You know, it's actually, it's the Torah, so it's a very nice metaphor. You know, but so yeah, that's interesting. But yes, I agree with you. We all have to listen to a lot more voices, I think, than we often hear, than we're willing to hear.
Very true.
Especially now.
Okay. Flies.
It's interesting watching how the sun's setting in everyone's different houses differently. Wilma, I want you to turn a light on before you turn your computer off.
We don't want you to stand up and fall over, Wilma.
You want me to turn my light on in the room? Huh?
Before you get up, we want you to turn your light on.
Yeah, I better not step on my dog.
Don't do that.
Not mine. Stanley will not appreciate that.
There we
No,
go.
right here. He's always
We feel
right.
better now, Wilma. Thank you. One of the other interesting things in this parsha is that there's a very clear parallelism in the once Balak takes Balaam to the edge of the cliff to look at the Israelites in the valley, you know, 3 times Balak tries to get Balaam to curse them and he doesn't. Yeah. And there's a very clear parallelism between those 3 times and the 3 times with the donkey, where now Balak is being Balaam and Balaam is being the donkey, right? And again, ultimately, on the 3rd attempt, the truth is spoken, which is matovu, or why are you hitting me? Depending on which part of it you're reading, but yeah.
A little better. That's almost too much.
It's fine. It's not too much, Anne. It's fine. Other thoughts?
I never did turn it off, did I?
So I know you said we weren't going there, Jenny, but everything I've read or discussed this week, I'm like, the stabby bits at the end are so weird. Where does it come from? And why is everyone routinely avoiding it, other than it being stabby bits?
Well, yeah. So Joey, do you want to remind people what the stabby bits are, in case not everyone has been communing with them?
I didn't exactly get all of it when I was even reading the Parsha. Something about sleeping with people that you weren't supposed to.
Right,
And other than that, I was struggling to actually figure out what was happening.
right. So the my understanding is that the Parsha mentions both Midianite and Moabite women, and kind of goes back and forth between the two, but either way, they're not good. And so the Israelite men start sleeping with these non-Israelite women and begin to worship their gods. And so God says to Moses,
Wait a minute.
what the heck is going on? And there's another round of, why did you take us out of Egypt where everything was fine? I mean, there's a whole nother round of that happens as well. Then they start sleeping with these women and start worshiping their gods, and that is clearly not acceptable. And God comes to Moses and says, make this stop. And Moses calls everybody together and starts to harangue them. And I can't remember the name, but somebody, and the story is confusing, right? Because what it says is here, they start sleeping with them, they start worshiping other gods. God gets angry, God talks to Moses, Moses starts to talk to the people. And it sounds like while Moses is talking to the people, this other man whose name I cannot remember stands up, takes his sword, lance, spear, whatever, and goes and impales a couple, an Israelite man and a Midianite or Moabite woman. And it's a fairly graphic description. And most commentators that I read are pretty clear that he's impaling them while they are having sex. And then once he does that, God kills another 10 or 20,000 people, and then the plague stops. Now, there has never previously been mention of a plague. Plague comes out of nowhere. But that's the stabby bit. And there's disagreement. I don't have the parsha in front of me, and I don't remember the specifics, but they are inside somewhere, and the Torah is not clear on where. And there are many of the commenters, particularly the medieval commentators, are really clear about the fact that they were actually in the sanctuary, they were in the tabernacle, they were in the Holy of Holies, and that's why they got impaled, because they were profaning the holiest place. That's as is not uncommon for the commentators. They seem to be interpreting things that are not actually said in the text, because it doesn't say that. There's also one of the other more 20th century commentators that I read said that the way that the language is presented about where that couple came, like how they showed up, that it wasn't just that he was sleeping with her, but that he married her. And so the real crime was intermarriage. Now, it may be that this is the reason I was avoiding this part of the text. I don't know how many of you know that he wasn't Jewish when I married him. He is now, but he wasn't then. And in addition to which, the Torah has also been really clear previously that Moses is married to a Midianite woman. Right. Ruth, who hasn't appeared yet but will, is a Moabite woman, and she's the progenitor of King David. So the Tanakh is really ambivalent on this whole issue of who can you sleep with, and when do you get impaled, and when do you get to be the progenitor of King David? Unclear. I don't think you're alone, Joey, in being lost about that. But if it would be helpful to talk about it, we could certainly talk about it. I don't have an answer.
Phineas and Eleazar. That's who it was.
Oh, was it Phineas?
Phineas, son of Eleazar.
Thank you. He was the impaler.
Mr.
Thank you.
I
The
was
word that
going to
came
say,
mind is
ye-
Karach, but I knew it wasn't him. He was a couple of parts.
Wait, it's Phineas the Impaler?
Phineas the Impaler, yes.
Is anybody else having Phineas and Ferb like him? Yes, thank you, Joey. Like this is just not right in so many ways in my head.
Right. Right. I guess his name should have been Vlad.
but no, I totally missed anything about marriage, Jenny. From what I got, I'm like, it just looked like the Israelite men were sleeping with women that they weren't supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Torah says. The Torah doesn't say specifically about marriage. So that is definitely an inference.
Yeah.
But it says, but so is the fact that they were having sex in the tabernacle an inference,
I don't know. I think that's definitely an inference
which,
that they were sleeping in the tabernacle.
oh, it's totally an inference.
The way sometimes I think about it is the stories being told by more than one person at the same time.
Very possibly.
Absolutely.
So
And
the
we're clearly
sleeping in the-
missing, there's
the
clearly a piece missing.
tabernacle sex thing is, that's a religious right, I think.
What?
It was often a religious right to have sex in a holy place. That's
Not an Israelite. But
though.
that may have been one of the pagan rites that they
Pagan.
were supposed to be leaving behind. Yeah, it
Mhm.
wasn't an Israelite thing.
Exactly.
So that that could be, like, you know.
Well, the person who's upset in the text is upset with the pagan religion or mixed marriages. There are a lot of people talking here and it's gotten garbled.
You know, and in addition to the fact that the text was written by comes from more than one source, both the redactor, the person who put it together, whenever that was, and all of the commentators have their own agendas, right?
They're
Absolutely.
different time periods too.
Right.
Mhm.
Although arguing against intermarriage has been a pretty consistent agenda for a number of centuries. And still is.
Yeah,
And
we've all managed
has
to ignore that one.
happening since the beginning, so.
I'm sorry, Jane, what were you saying? Or Rachel, what were you saying?
I said, and we've all managed to ignore that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, mom came up with a bunch of nice Jewish girls off of the, mixed marriage on her end, so.
Right. Yeah. Well, the first year that David and I were married, we went to high holiday services at Hillel at Stanford, and in the afternoon of Yom Kippur, they had a discussion. They had several discussion groups, and we went to one on interfaith relationships. And there was a man there who was really clear about the fact that he had college-age young adult kids and had come to this discussion group basically to gather horror stories so that he could go home and tell his children, this is why you shouldn't date out.
It makes sense.
He was really quite direct about that.
We were not helpful to him in that regard.
No,
No, we were not,
you were not.
but yeah.
Mom and dad have not been helpful in that regard either. They are 50 plus years of
51,
marriage. Yeah, they're 51 years of marriage in a nice, interfaith marriage.
Faith, if you're converted though? Well, it started out that way.
Yeah, she
For a
didn't
long
convert
time.
till I was 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in kindergarten.
Yeah. My usual response to concerns about that is I ended up adding 2 to the tribe. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, and honestly, my very first board meeting when I first joined the board in Am Haskalah, which was a long time ago, we were in the middle of trying to revise the bylaws and spent pretty much the entire meeting talking about the very first sentence, which was, do you have to be Jewish to join the congregation?
Mm.
And what does that mean? And it was, it was not straightforward. It was not a straightforward conversation. And one of the things I was distressed about was that we were at that, the way the bylaws were written up until that point, if you joined as a single member, you had to actually be Jewish or have converted. But if you were married to a Jew, you could join as a family. People who were there was a Jew married to a non-Jew.
By association.
Which struck me as precisely backwards, or at least inconsistent, because to me, if somebody on their own wants to join, that's, as opposed to maybe they're just being dragged by their spouse. I don't know.
Right,
So
yeah.
it was an interesting conversation. It was an interesting introduction to synagogue governance.
Mhm.
How does it read now?
I honestly don't remember, Wilma.
We tweaked it a little bit, but it's not hugely different. We've got a little more careful with the way we phrased, saying, instead of saying Jew and non-Jew, saying people of other faiths, or.
I think what we talked about at the time was using phrasing about living a Jewish life.
That's
Because what we were really looking for, so the concern on the part of some members of the board was that we didn't want to be taken over by Jews for Jesus. Like, that was a very clearly articulated concern.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And at the same time, the consequence of those bylaws was that at that point, that was before Gail Molesky officially converted, we returned her check and refused to let her pay dues.
Oh, no.
Which, given this congregation's financial standing, which is just dumb.
That's so.
So,
And
so
it's
that was,
bylaws.
like, and I knew I was sitting there thinking, okay, I know I'm new, but that's dumb. Like, that is counterproductive. So what I don't know, Liz, you probably have them in front of you. What I remember talking about was language around committing to live a Jewish life.
All about the visual aids.
It's the studying for conversion.
Yeah.
That line was not there.
Yeah, that's what we had we had some form of that at that time. I remember that.
You weren't.
Yeah.
It's
And,
copy.
and all persons of the Jewish faith, by their definition, is good enough. It's not by birth or by conversion or whatever. It's their
Right.
determination of being of the Jewish
Right.
faith.
So, and yeah, and that's the thing. It's so what wasn't there was that phrase about identify with another faith, spiritual practice, or no faith, and about people who were actively studying for conversion.
Right.
Because that would have covered Gail, who was actively studying for conversion at that point.
Right.
So, yeah. So that is not, it has been changed since that. This must have been 1997
Or
somewhere.
it was like
It's a while
Maybe
ago.
earlier, I don't know. You were pretty quick. You got involved in.
Big shock.
Yes,
Was I on the board before you converted? I guess I was.
you were.
Yeah.
He was not president before he converted.
No,
I would say I might have been on board before.
Because Joey,
you may have been, but you weren't president.
I was not president.
No.
No, but we had a run.
David has been
with
president
me
of
and
the
with Larry
congregation too.
And Todd
multiple
Hacker.
times.
Todd Hacker. As soon as you converted, we made you president.
Pretty much. No, Todd had converted before he joined Haskalah.
Yes.
But you and Larry, yeah, that was pretty much a direct line. Yeah. Get dipped, become president.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We wandered a bit away from the parsha.
As always.
Yeah, but that's an interesting.
But I will tell you this, if we are sending this to our new student rabbi,
just
we are
gonna
at least
say
accurately
great.
representing ourselves.
Great background.
Yes.
Getting a lot of info. Yeah.
Anything else before we move on with conclude the service?
I'm glad that Liz does not have to reject my dues because I'm in the midst of conversion.
So are we, Joey. We're very glad.
So are we.
Bad
Absolutely.
too.
But as soon as you get dipped, you're going on the board. just so you know.
Oh, no, 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 not
Just so
just on
you
the board. You
know.
can be on the board before you get dipped.
Oh,
Then
all
you become
right.
president.
Next meeting is August 7th at 11 a.m.
We'll see. I mean, it already shows up because of how you have
True,
Google
because
Calendar
they
set up.
kick
So
out
I
of it.
see
Yes.
the
Oh,
board
it's on
meetings
there.
even
They're
if
all
I
on
don't
there.
get
excuse.
there.
No excuse. All right.
All right. All right, let us conclude the service on page 121 with Elenu.
Well, now, wait a minute, we haven't done Yisker yet either.
We do that after Elenu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the next thing.
Okay.
So Elenu is on 121. And if you will all indulge me, we're going to do the Ain Ode tune. Rise as you are able. Ain Ode, Ain Ode, Ain Ode, Ain Ode. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotzer bereshit, shanatan lanu Torah temet, ve'achei olam nata betakenu, Ein Od, Ein Od, Ein Od, Ein Od. V'anachnu korim u'mishtakavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlakim HaKadosh Baruch Hu shehu notei shamayim v'yosed haaretz u'moshev yekaro b'shamayim imal u'shchinatu zo begovei meromim Hu Eloheinu Ein Od, Ein Od, Ein Od, Ein Od, Ein Od. Malkeinu efes ulato, kakatuv b'torato. Yadata hayom bahashavota elevavecha ki Adonai hu ha-Elohim bashamayim mimal ve'al haaretz mitachad ein od ein od ein od ein od ein od ein od ein od. Kagatu b'toratecha Adonai imlok le'olam va'ed v'neimar v'chaya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. It is not the seeking after God that divides, but the claim to have found God and to have discovered the only proper way of obeying God and communing with God. Now we come to Yizkor. In reciting the Kaddish, we affirm our awareness of holiness in our world. Much of our experience of divine goodness, grace, and love has come to us through those whose lives have touched our own. We invoke the transcendent power of love and caring as we sanctify God's name. In loving memory of Phyllis Becker, Ilse Rosenfelder Frank, Esther Werf, Yona Lib, Morris Benovitz, Adam Drozdowicz, Frank Rosenblum, Harold Timmerman, Eli Nippon, Rose Katz, Walter Cohen, Sherry Schwartz, Barbara Werf. As a community, we are in the first year of mourning for our members, Norma Cohen and Bill Ernest. We especially comfort our members who are in their first year of mourning. Jody Rosenblum, Tamar Ernest, Maddie Langman, Dave Smith, and Dan Denenberg. Where are you on that list? Oh, God, I'm sorry. I forgot. Yikes. Yit Kadal, Viet Kadash, Shemay Rabbah, Be'alma Divrach, Yerute, Be'amlik Malchute, B'chayakon, Uvyomakon, Uvchaye Dekol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala Ubizman Kariv, V'yamru, Amen. Yehe Shmei Rabbah Mavorach, Le'olam Umay Umaya. Yit Barak, V'yit Tabach, V'yit Pa'ar, V'yit Ramam, V'yit Naseh, V'yit Adar, V'yit Aleh, V'yit Halal, Shmei Dekudusha Berechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbekata v'nechamata da'amiram be'alma v'yamru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Osei shalom b'mamav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'yal kol yoshvei tevel, v'yamru amen. Announcements?
Our next service is in 2 weeks. There's nothing else going on this weekend, so enjoy yourself and have a lovely show.
Okay. Thank you. And for the end of the service, instead of Adon Olam, I would like to sing Yolisa Goy, Lo Yisa Goy, excuse me, on 658, 659, because I think we need as much peace in the world as we can possibly get. Lo Yisa Goy Hel Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmadu Hod Milchama, Lo Yisa Goy Hel Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmadu Hod Milchama, Lo Yisa Goy Hel Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmadu Hod Milchama, Lo Yisa Goy Hel Goy Cherev, Lo Yilmadu Od Milchama, and everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath their vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares beat their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And there's just one other thing I want to
Where were
read.
the last words that you sang?
I'm sorry?
Where were the last words that you sang?
They're not on there. I'm sorry. The version of this I learned a long time ago from a folk group, and it has those English words. The next time I do it, I'll get them up on the screen. I apologize.
I'll make a little slide out of them. We'll have them next.
All right, I'll send them to you. And I just want to read, this is Yehuda Amachai. Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank you.
Does anybody know how Betsy Nippon is doing? And you usually keep in touch with Betsy.
You're muted, Ann.
And I can't hear you.
I talked to her right before she started her treatment. And she seemed very positive. I was positive too.
What kind of treatment was she getting?
I'm not sure. I'll have to contact her and get back to you all.
Yeah, I don't even know. Is she living in her house or with somebody else, or what's happening with her?
I think she's in her house.
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sort of expecting her to completely recover.
Oh yeah, me too.
But maybe everybody's expecting me to recover.
Well, I hope so.
I
You
hope so too. I'm fine right now.
Well, that's all that matters, isn't it?
Oh, no, mentally you have to be on board too, and that's hard.
What'd you say?
Mentally, it's difficult.
Oh,
Very difficult.
Doing the right treatment. How long is this gonna last? Yeah, you can go on forever.
I'm gonna.
Where are you